Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's going to be a really fun and informative 45 minutes, 1 hour, and I'm so glad that you could join us because we would love to hear from you as well, and you'll get the chance to ask your questions to us all towards the end. But who is us all? Well, you might very well know one of us or some of us. You've got myself, Lee McKenzie, you've got Catherine Bond-Muir, you have Dr. Sabrina Cohen-Hatton, and of course, Yvonne Bajela. Now, we're all going to take it in turns, just so you know, to give our thoughts, our experiences. And interestingly for me, we've actually just been talking about this. We don't know what each other is going to say. So I'm pretty sure we won't contradict each other, but it's going to be really nice just to hear everybody's perspectives for the first time. I also quite like, in a slightly sort of anarchistic way, that this isn't being done on International Women's Day, because whilst it's great to have one day to unite, I think really we can all be strong women on every day of the year. So I'm quite pleased that we're not actually doing it on International Women's Day. For those of you who don't know me, I am a sports presenter mainly across Channel 4 and BBC. So the focus of my life is always what it is like to be a female in a man's world, at rugby matches, at Formula One races, and so be it. And we'll get onto that in a moment, because what I think is really interesting and what I sort of choose to challenge is just this idea of sometimes it's just the small things, the minutiae, the day-to-day practice of what it's like to be a woman that can catch you out. Because the big things we can prepare for, but the smaller things, that's sometimes the ones that really throw you. So I present Channel 4, BBC, a lot of motorsport, Formula One, now W Series. We'll come on to that as well with Catherine. A lot of rugby, Six Nations, men's and women's, Olympics, Paralympics, equestrian, Wimbledon. I always leave something out, but that basically it sums up my year this year. Fingers crossed it all goes ahead. The sports I've presented a lot recently, they all also have a very successful women's series, which is pleasing when you go to the Women's Six Nations or W Series and you see the reaction that gets. W Series is the perfect example. It's the only live motor racing on a front-facing free-to-air channel, which is so important. And it's the same with Six Nations. I presented in October. It was the very first women's match to ever go out live, and it went out on BBC Two. We had almost 1 million people watching, which is incredible. And it's only sometimes then you question, why is it taking so long? I've presented these highlights programs for 6 years, but there is an appetite there, and that's hugely important. Wimbledon is a different thing, obviously. I'm working and interviewing some of the most successful and highly paid female athletes in the world of all time. But not every female athlete is fortunate enough to be in that position. I get, as I mentioned at the start, asked probably almost constantly. Every interview that somebody does with me is mostly about what it's like to be a female in a man's world. Maybe it's something I take for granted. I don't think it's necessarily something which defines me from my perspective, but I think it actually is what defines me through other people's eyes, which might sound a little bit strange. I have never woken up in the morning and thought, I want to be the best female to ask a question on TV today, or I want to be the best female to present a program on television today. Because to me, if I go down that route, I only see 50% of the bigger picture. I want to be the best person to ask a question on TV today. I want to be the best presenter on TV today. Now, often that won't be the case, but that is always the aim. I don't like to think that I am just defined in my workplace as being a female. But I understand it. I was the first female to present a live Formula One program, and it's been on television since, the sort of the late 50s. So I understand why it creates attention, but for me, it's not something which really enters my mind. And maybe it's because I started in news. I come from a news background. I covered the Lockerbie trial and general elections, and there are a lot of strong women in news. There are a lot of strong female interviewers out there, as we've seen this week, in actual fact. And I try and apply that identity and those ethics to everything I do. So sometimes it's not just, that over prep to prove myself or things like that. That's not because I'm a female. That's just because of who I am. But and this is the day-to-day stuff that I was talking about at the beginning. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to be a co-driver in some rounds of rallying, and I took part in some rounds of the World Rally Championship, in the UK and abroad. Now, when you rally in the UK, there's trees and there's dirt tracks and there's houses, and it's very much, the forests of the UK. When you go to the Arctic, it is exactly as you imagine. You could see for 50 miles. It's Arctic tundra. There are no trees. There's nothing to hide behind. So 7 hours into a rally, when you have, probably taken on 2 liters of water and not been to the loo, and you need to get out your car and just go to the loo, it's easy for a guy. It hadn't even entered my mind as a female what this was going to be like. Now, what it was going to be like was me in a race suit, 2 layers of fireproof underwear. And what do? I could literally see if a rabbit ran across the tundra 50 miles away. So what you need is an understanding driver, no social media, and lightning quick reactions. And I was actually, and this is, it happened several times, you're hiding behind the door of your car and you're sort of, when you take a rally on, you're fierce, you're fabulous, you're in this male environment and you're bossing it. And actually in this moment, you're sort of squatting behind a door, you're looking up, your name and your blood group is emblazoned across the window just in case there's a terrible accident and you need a quick transfusion. So, be RH positive right in front of me, and I am just needing to go to the loo. And it is those basic things about being a woman. We can be the best at what we do, but sometimes you can be tripped up by something that hasn't even entered your mind because you plan for the big things. You sort of go out there and you prepare so well. And I think, for me, it's the day-to-day business of being a woman, which is interesting. There is a perception that to be a successful woman, you need to be a fierce sort of ball breaker type of a woman. And maybe because the older I get, the less I subscribe to that. And that's what I choose to challenge, this sort of perception of what it's like to be a woman, because you can keep being you. You can have a softness. You can be feminine. A great friend of mine became the first female Formula One team principal. Now, Catherine will subscribe to this. When you're at a racetrack, you probably wear trousers, a shirt, you're in trainers because you're covering the miles. It doesn't mean to say that's what you're like when you're away from the track. So when Manisha took over at the time the Sauber team, she went to her first team bosses meeting. She's a very successful lawyer, hair down, makeup on, baby pink Chanel suit. She stormed in there. The guys had no idea what was coming at them because they'd only ever seen her in this other way. And I loved that because that to me is the key to all this. What does a successful woman look like? Well, it looks like all of us. It's whatever we want it to look like. Times have changed, and I 100% appreciate that the image of a successful woman now might not be what it was, throughout the generations. We've gone from burning bras to push-up bras in the 90s. We've gone from, power suits to dressing from the waist up in loungewear and trying to homeschool and trying to be the best you can be. But that's okay, because a successful woman to me comes in so many guises. It isn't just a job. It isn't appearance. It isn't money. It's an attitude. And that is something that we can all have. It doesn't matter if you're taking on a rally or hiding behind a door to try and go to the loo. It's just an attitude. And we can all embrace that. And we have other very successful women alongside me who's hosting this today. And I can't wait to hear their thoughts as well. But, we will all go through the same day-to-day stuff. We all come from very different industries and businesses and backgrounds and everything like that. But it doesn't matter if it's one of us who's talking or one of you who's listening. We all have those same issues, and it isn't about our occupation. It is literally about our attitude, and that's something that we can all embrace. So that's just a little flavor from me. As I say, keep your questions coming in, and we're going to all have a bit of a chat at the end as well. So I think next, I would like to ask, there's a pick and mix here. There's someone who said they don't want to be next. We'll make that clear as well. But let's just go with Sabrina, Dr. Sabrina Cohen-Hatton. Over to you.
Thanks, Lee. And hi, everyone. It's really great to be joining you today. And one thing that I love about the idea of choosing to challenge is I think that you can apply it to so many different things. To give you a bit of background about me, I joined the fire service when I was 18 years old, and I'm now one of the most senior women firefighters in the UK. And there's a point for me here about firefighting. Now, whenever I ask people to imagine a firefighter and imagine this and tell me what comes to mind, the kind of things that they say almost all the time are, I'm thinking of someone who's brave, I'm thinking of someone who's big, I'm thinking of someone that's a man and that looks incredibly heroic. And I know that we've got this stereotype, which is hugely deeply ingrained, of this kind of lovable rogue. And I get that, but I also know that I am the last person that would ever be able to meet that stereotype. And I knew that when I joined the fire service, and I know that today. But in all honesty, I think that there's something incredibly powerful about being different. And while I haven't always known it and I haven't always appreciated it at the time, I think sometimes being different and choosing to challenge that, idea of what normality needs to be in your industry or your chosen sphere or whatever, I think is so empowering. And I'll tell you a story about why, for me, it's been incredibly empowering. One of the things that I've done alongside my career is neuroscience. Now, you might not traditionally put that together, but one day I had an event that happened to me. I was called to an incident that completely changed the course of everything. And my husband, to be at the time, was involved in a fire where he was a firefighter as well, where another firefighter had been very severely burned. And there was a 1 in 4 chance it was him that was injured. And I was called to deal with that incident. And it was the most heart-wrenchingly difficult experience that I'd ever had, because I was torn between that role of a responder and all of the responsibility and accountability that goes with that, and the role of a loved one, and all of the kind of fears and anxieties that go with that. And although it wasn't him, it was our friend, another colleague, who had been really badly injured. And I'd struggled with it for a while, and I wanted to try to do something, firstly, to take control of that feeling, and secondly, to stop anyone else going through that. So I ended up going back to night school and doing a degree and a PhD in neuroscience. And then for nearly a decade now, I've been doing research looking at how we can reduce human error to keep our people in the emergency services safer, to stop anyone else from going through that. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because I know that the idea of doing something really quite geeky and nerdy like neuroscience does not chime with most people's idea of what a firefighter is. But I can honestly tell you with my hand on my heart that if I had fitted the mold, I honestly don't believe that the mold would have permitted that kind of deviation. So by not being constrained by that stereotype, I could draw my own boundaries, which I think was really, really key for me in doing something that I believe was really worthwhile. So for me, there's something about choosing to challenge the things you think you know, choosing to challenge the things that you think are normal. And I don't come from a very traditional background at all. When I was growing up, I'd experienced homelessness when I was 15. So the idea of someone like me joining an industry and doing okay was for something, for me, felt so far out of reach. And Lee, you talked about your idea of success and successful women and what that meant to be successful. And I think you're so right. There is something crucial about reframing what we think about when we think about success. Because for me, when I looked at leaders and successful people, I saw people who always put their best foot forward, right? I saw people who were completely infallible, who never had a fault, who always knew what to do, who had no vulnerabilities. And for me, I had this background that made me feel quite vulnerable. So the idea of standing up and telling people about that was something that didn't chime with my idea of what success looked like. So I hid it for more than 20 years, and I've only recently started to talk about it. But by talking about it, we then tell other people who've had those same challenges that actually there is a place in the world for people like us to be successful, no matter where you come from. So I think for me, choosing to challenge isn't just challenging the stereotypes, which I think is really important, by the way, but it's also about challenging what we think about when we think about success. Are we thinking about the showreel version of everyone that we see, or are we comfortable with what's real that's sitting behind?
Yeah, that's it's a wonderful sort of idea, but also not just an idea, a sort of way that we should all be living our lives. And we're going to talk a lot more a little bit later. Just before we move on to Yvonne, what you say is it was perfect, though. You know, it's those little things where the other day, for example, I was putting up this video which had gone viral last year for International Women's Day. And it was very, you know, an empowering video. And this was on International Women's Day. In the process of doing it, I managed to miss out the W on the hashtag. So it like International Omens Day. I mean, what kind of an imbecile does that? So I got a whole new group of followers. I'm not a big fan of the occult. However, you know, it's going to be much more interesting than people just shouting at me about referees' decisions and whether their granny could win in Lewis Hamilton's car, because, you know, it's like, so from that point of view, sometimes, as you say, you can be like, you know, in that moment, but we're all fallible, aren't we? It's like, what is success? We are all fallible. Keep sending your questions in, and we're going to move on to Yvonne now, who is another incredible woman and is going to share her story with us.
Thank you so much. Super excited to be here today. And Lee, I echo what you said earlier. We should celebrate women every day, not just on International Women's Day. So my name is Yvonne Bajela. I'm a founding member and principal at Impact Acts, which is essentially a UK-based venture capital fund based here in London. And so I spend a lot of my time investing in early stage companies, which are led by underrepresented entrepreneurs, so females and other groups where historically they've received less than 2% of all the funding to businesses. I actually started my career in a male-dominated world of investment banking, and I remember starting out just fresh out of university. It was my first office job, and as you can tell, I'm someone that's quite soft-spoken, and I was told, Yvonne, you need to be more aggressive, you need to be more ballsy. And that really affected me, because at the time I just thought, okay, like I'm not fitting in here. So obviously like everyone's like really loud, and I kind of felt out of place. But actually what I've come to realize, and exactly what Dr. Sabrina said, being different is actually really empowering. And so I decided to leave investment banking. I went into strategy consulting, and that led me to realize that, I found what worked for me. I really enjoyed working with scrappy early stage companies at the formation stage. And the fact that, yes, I was, soft-spoken, and I was able to demonstrate that I was empathetic, and that really resonated with the entrepreneurs I was working with. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, you don't have to fit into a box. And, if something doesn't work for you, there's somewhere where you will be able to thrive. There's an environment where you will be able to thrive. And so now I'm working at a firm where I'm helping increase investments to female and diverse groups. And, I always say that my ability to be empathetic is truly my superpower. And when it comes to the world of business, I choose to challenge the fact that, business can be lonely, it can be inaccessible to many marginalized groups. However, business is for everyone. We need to create environments where all types of people can thrive. And that's what I try to create every day. Because the reality is there's a lot of bias within the industry that I work in. Not every female founder is able to raise capital. And there's a lot more work that we need to do. I mean, if you look at all the most successful companies that we have in the world today, Amazon, Facebook, Google, these are all some of the most valuable companies. Why can't they be run by a woman? And without being given the funding at the early stage, then that's not going to happen. I love the image a couple of weeks back of the founder of Bumble when she was, she'd gone to the New York Stock Exchange, where she went to put the company public, and she had her baby in her hand as well. And that's challenging the status quo. We need to see more than that, and that's what I'm here to challenge.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And you are the perfect example of what it is like to be a successful woman in your industry as well. And I'm pleased that you sort of echo the sentiments. And I think we all will echo the sentiments of what a successful woman looks like, because there is no one size fits all for that, is there? So Catherine, who I work with alongside at W Series. I say work with. She is actually my boss, so I will treat her with a massive amount of respect and hand over the floor to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Lee. Just following on from what Yvonne said about that she was a quiet person. Now, I am not, and I never have been. And I think that my difference is much more of an old-fashioned view, because I'm older than everyone else here who's been incredibly successful. And I think maybe my early success was that I was more like a boy than everyone else was. Why I'm like that is very easy and straightforward. I had two older brothers. One of my brothers is 11 months older than me, and another is 16 months older than that. So my mother had 4 children in 4 years. And so we're all really chucked together we're very close in age, and we were basically brought up with each other. So it was in a very amusing but combative environment, and there was no room for weakness at all. My brothers never gave me an easy time or were particularly protective over me, and I battled along with the rest of them, and that was the way that I was brought up. So in the early 90s, right at the beginning of the 90s, I started my legal career. I qualified as a solicitor, and even at that time, that profession was pretty equally split amongst my peers. But if you look to the partners, there were very, very few female partners. So we were probably the first group of women that were surrounded by lots of women our age. But I agree with Yvonne, especially when I went into investment banking a few years later. It was still a very much a male-dominated environment. And I wasn't told, oh, you speak so quietly, because it was a little bit like going home and back home, because it was just all about fighting, with the boys. And when I don't mean literally fighting, it was about, sort of a lot of verbal exchanges with the boys, that because I was one of the boys, it was an easy environment for me to work in. Now, I appreciate that is not a good environment generally. I'm sure both Yvonne and Sabrina will have lots and lots of experiences about working in a male environment, but I do put my hand up to say that I did not find that difficult myself. But an environment has to be open to all women, irrespective of personality and irrespective of whether you were brought up with older brothers or not. So I will always choose to challenge that. But what is interesting is about moving on, if I can talk about W Series now. W Series was set up because there was a massive gender imbalance in motorsport. And that is ultimately what I chose to challenge. I had years of experience of working in sport, both as a solicitor and as a banker and as a corporate finance advisor. But I had no experience of motorsport itself. And I started off this venture knowing very little about motorsport, but managed to surround myself with people who Lee will know very well, sort of great icons of motorsport like Dave Ryan, David Coulthard, Matt Bishop. I found via David, Sean Wadsworth, who's invested a massive amount of money into the business. And so I've had other people's support around me, and notably all of those are male, but because motorsport is a male sport, I needed their help to make W Series the almost instant success that it has been. We have challenged the normal, and it's not just women challenging the normal. As I say, men have also challenged this too. But what will W Series be in the future? Will we continue to challenge? I think as time goes on, I think that there will be an equalization of this gender imbalance as time goes on, but we do need to keep ourselves or true to ourselves and make sure that we keep on the progress of that mission. And that's not just about drivers, that's just not about people who work at W Series, that's also mechanics and engineers and everyone working in that environment. And hopefully, in the world in 20 years, that will change. So that is what I will continue to choose to challenge, Lee.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and also Yvonne and Sabrina at this stage. But before we start getting into the questions that everybody who's watching is sending in, I'm just interested in really all your thoughts, and because Catherine sort of touched upon it, when you're growing up, or at which point when you were growing up, I'll start with you, Sabrina. Did you sort of question the status quo? Question what was happening, or did that happen when you got into the workplace?
It's a really good question, actually. And I think for me, the way that I grew up, it was a really challenging environment. My dad died when I was very young, and my mum suffered really badly with her mental health. So we were very different to the majority of our peers anyway. So I never really felt like I fitted in. My grandparents were refugees, and my father was an immigrant into this country. And I used to see people treating him differently to the way that they would treat my mum. I'd go into a shop with my mum and people would come and help him straight away. I'd go into a shop with my dad and I couldn't figure out why we'd be ignored, So I think when I was growing up, I was used to feeling like the odd one out in many respects and for many different reasons. And I think in a way, I mean, I talked earlier on how being different helped me in terms of it being like a superpower because you could do things differently. I think, to be fair, I grew up having a very different lens. I didn't have a comfortable life. So being comfortable with being uncomfortable was something that I'd already had a lot of practice at. So I think in that respect, actually, it might have been a bit of an advantage because I didn't relate to the status quo. So I didn't try to relate to it either. And it made me, well, sometimes it could be difficult to be comfortable in your own skin, especially when I first joined my industry and there were only 1% of operational firefighters that were women. I was woman number 7 in 1,700 men. So there weren't very many of us. So it was difficult, and I'm not going to pretend that it's easy when you feel so different. But I think having that lens of knowing that it's different for you and that's okay because there'll be a way through it, I think possibly could have been an advantage for me.
And Yvonne, was there a sort of light bulb moment for you when you realized it was a sort of different world?
Yeah, for me, I think, I grew up with a very supportive father who always encouraged me to speak up and voice my opinions. So I remember, when I was 10 years old and children were playing out, I would be at home debating the Financial Times with my father, which seemed really odd. And actually, people used to think, what are you doing? But actually, I think it really did frame my mind and help instill belief in me that, I could change the world from a financial perspective if I really wanted to. And that's something that followed through to me to school, sixth form, university. I remember being at university and I studied economics. When we'll be learning about economic theory, I used to question the lecturers on why is what you're teaching me not happening in the economy in reality. They used to get really annoyed, but I think that's something that I've generally carried through with me. And as an investor now, particularly in technology companies, within the industry that I work in, you do have to be intellectually curious because you're challenging the norms. Companies that I'm investing in are trying to disrupt entire industries. And so it really does help to really challenge the status quo. And I think for me, realizing from a very early age that it's okay to question things and it's okay to not just go with the flow. I remember when I was in banking and I questioned things very early on. As a graduate, you're told to just get on with things. And I was someone that was like, why do we do things this way? Why are we not doing something that's going to make things, 10 minutes faster? And that was actually really valued. It brought about substantial change. And so for me, I think it's really important to create environments and spaces where you can speak out, share your opinion and question things.
And Catherine, from your point of view, you touched upon having brothers. Was that the sort of thing that they included you, and therefore there wasn't a massive amount of difference?
Oh, my brothers didn't include me in anything. I had to find, they had no interest in having a little sister anywhere near them. I think a lot of the self-belief in being able to challenge other people probably came from my parents. You know, whilst they were both, you know, very old-fashioned people, they were very modern to the extent that they all brought us up in exactly the same way professionally. I mean, I had, you know, it was expected that we would all get professional qualifications. So they didn't say, oh, the boys should get professional qualifications and the girls can go off and do something else. No, it was expected of us to do that. So I think that inner confidence, as Yvonne has said, you know, has come from your parents. You know, they would never, and my mother's, you think I'm tough, you should meet my mother. I mean, boy, hell, she can break some balls, but she could. But it was that belief that, well, of course you're as good as a boy. You know, there was never any suggestion that you weren't as able or capable of being of doing as well as a man. And also that self-belief that, you know, you can achieve anything that you want to do, as Yvonne's parents or father encouraged her to do.
Yeah, from my point of view, when I think back to what I was like as a child, I wanted to be a journalist from the age of 12. My father was a Fleet Street journalist. And to be fair to him, he took me to, I'd probably been to just about every major sporting event in the UK by the time I was 13. So people at school thought I was very odd. I went to a very, not bad school, but very, very average school, probably bad school. And from that point of view, I would just go off. I'd done Rugby World Cups, Wimbledon's, things. I just wanted to be there and see it. Now, you know, big props to him for taking this small, annoying child to everything. And then when I was 15, I used to get a Monday morning off school to go into the local newspaper to write the rugby report. And I would have gone to the rugby on the Saturday, watched it, interviewed the players. Now, goodness knows what they thought when this, you know, annoying 15-year-olds turning up and asking about scrummaging and things that, you know, the dark arts that you have no idea what you're talking about. And then I would write it up for the newspaper. And I just think now, again, as Catherine said, a lot of them were men who were supporting me, but my brother had no interest in any of this. He thought, and still thinks, I'm just incredibly strange. You know, we both had horses. So my mum and dad sort of encouraged us both. There wasn't really, you know, horses were for girls and rugby was for boys. You know, he didn't want to play rugby. I had horses and liked rugby. The only thing was that, and it still, you know, upsets me to this day, he had tiny, skinny calves. So his riding boots were narrow and mine were extra wide. So that was like, you know, the only thing which used to trouble me. But it was a very sort of inclusive family of, it wasn't boys and girls. It was pick and choose what you want. And I think that's really where I started. We have got a lot of questions coming in. So I think there's no point me asking questions, which is my day-to-day business, when other people can ask them for me. So it's not laziness. I'd like to make that clear. But let's just start with, let me see. Anna Francis says, as a woman working in a male-dominated environment, I think it can feel like you're standing alone sometimes. What would you say about the value of community and having a support network when it comes to feeling able to challenge the norm? And thank you. She's already found this very inspiring. So I don't know who wants to kick off with that one.
I'm happy to. So in the industry that I work in, there's, you know, roughly about 9% of female investors, and there's a lot of talk around the bias within the industry when it comes to males funding males and so on. And so when I joined the industry, I did feel quite isolated, and I immediately, you know, decided to reach out to all the other female investors within the industry, and we formed what you could call a sisterhood, in that we come together, hold virtual coffees, particularly, you know, since the pandemic. It's something that we've really bonded over, coming together, sharing our experience of being women within the industry, and just building those connections and being able to share our experiences. And I think it's really important to find your tribe wherever you work, whatever industry you're working. And that doesn't just have to be, you know, females. but people that you can just be really open and transparent with. And that for me has really helped in my career. It's something that I highly suggest.
I would completely echo Yvonne's words. I think it's really important to find like-minded people in your working environment. I mean, it's terrible to hear that someone feels isolated. I think it's you know, I think if the norm, or if you aren't happy with the way things are at the moment, you need to change it. So if you are the person who is going to form, you know, a women's group in either your professional or your working environment, then that is, I think, a really positive step, because it is great to have that female influence and being able to talk to different women. And whilst I have amazing female colleagues at W Series, my work with Motorsport UK, which is the governing body of motorsport, I've found invaluable, because I've found lots and lots of more different women who work in the environment, and they've been a massive help and support to me as to what I do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. And for me, there's something comforting in knowing that no matter how difficult something is when you're experiencing it, or how frustrating it can be, that you're not the only person that's gone through that, and that you can learn from other people's experiences as well, either in terms of how you can deal with something, but also in terms of sometimes that moral support can be really, really helpful. So I would absolutely echo the sentiments that have already been shared by other panelists, and say it can be so crucial to have that support network around you, especially if you're the one that's choosing to challenge, whether you're challenging a stereotype, whether you're challenging the status quo, whatever you're doing. Change is hard, and having people around you that you can support you when you're doing that will make the journey that little bit easier. So I would always suggest doing that.
Okay, Isadora Kvetkoska, I probably just ruined your name. I hugely apologize for that. I'm trying to get all these questions as they're coming in, and they're coming in on chat and Q&A. So we'll probably try and stick to Q&A because there's so many questions coming in. So we might just touch upon one for each of you, and then we'll try and cover off as many. How do you, well, this one maybe actually you can all come in on the back of, because I think you'll all have different experiences. Hopefully not, but I imagine you do. How do you deal with sexism from colleagues? Yvonne?
Yeah, so I remember actually when I was working as strategy consultant, I had a meeting and I was there before anyone else, and I was actually asked, "Oh, can you get me a cup of tea, please?" "Oh, grey would be great." And I was like, "I'm not the tea lady. I'm actually here to participate in the meeting." But I think the key thing is that you have to find the confidence within yourself, because wherever you are in the workplace, there are going to be people that get on the wrong side of you, and if you don't have that confidence, first of all, then that can really weigh down on you. So I really encourage you to build the confidence. Again, find your tribe, people that can really bring you up when stuff like that do happen. And also, if there are any issues, then report it as well to HR department or the relevant channels within the organization, because I think more and more so than before, these things shouldn't be tolerated, and so don't be afraid to speak out about it.
I think that's a really important point, actually. And I like many women before me, had experienced sexism in my industry. I joined 20 years ago now, and I think I joined at the cusp of a change. And while I had many more positive experiences, yeah, of course, there were times when I was treated in a way that I wouldn't have been treated if I was a guy. I've had my kit messed with by other people. I've been told that things have to be different for me because I'm not a bloke, and I've experienced sexual harassment more times than I care to remember. I put up with it at the time, which was wrong. I didn't say anything at the time because I was young and I was insecure. And if I'm honest, I was afraid that if I spoke out, it would affect my reputation. I felt like the balance of power was against me, so I didn't say anything. Now, by not saying anything, the problem was I might have survived, but I wasn't stopping it from happening to anybody else. And that's something that I regret now. And I work really hard to try to change that for other people. And what I would say is you don't need to wait for some big policy change or some big program. Please don't underestimate the impact that you can have when you see those things happening, when you see things that are not just or not right. Just the power to have that conversation with someone. And you don't have to do it in front of everyone if it's going to embarrass or humiliate. Just pull that person to one side afterwards and say, look, do you realize that you're always speaking over Sarah? Do you know how that would make them feel? Or do you realize when Jane made that contribution, you completely ignored it, but when John made it, you gave them a round of applause, and then suddenly you went on that direction? And very often people don't even realize that they're doing these things because these are gendered stereotypes that are deeply ingrained, and they're biases that sit below the level of consciousness. So having the courage to challenge in whichever way you're able to can be so powerful, and it makes that difference not just for that person who is involved in that interaction, but for everybody else coming up behind them. So I would encourage you to do so.
Catherine, I'm going to direct a couple of WCD's questions towards you as well, because there's plenty of those. Taylor Cocod has asked several questions, but let's start with this one. What is WCD's most wanting to achieve this year, and how does it feel you can reach a broader audience and engage more viewers? You can explain also that WCD's is for the first time joining Formula One, which will hopefully tick a couple of those boxes as well.
Yes, sure. What are we? I think we spent our first year explaining what W Series was and why it was needed. I think the big change in this year is that we can start telling the stories of the stars of our show, which is, the stories of the drivers. And that is going to make W Series more interesting, more fun, and much more meaningful. I mean, whenever I talk about W Series, you can't get away from what it is. It is a sport, and we need to be producing, great quality sport. And that's what we need to be able to bring in order to increase our fan base. But obviously what we want to achieve this year is to increase our audience and our fans, across the globe. And having a partnership with Formula One is really going to encourage us to be able to do that more easily, because we're on, the largest stage of motorsport in the world. So it's really about engaging with a new audience, engaging with an audience that isn't just a motorsport audience, and try and attract, more people all over the world to come and watch the fun.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I will say that obviously I present WCD, so I have a bit of bias. But one thing that I always said in year one was that I actually hoped that would be casual viewers who would be, channel hopping and be like, wow, this is incredible racing. And they wouldn't even know it was a women's motor racing series until whoever it was took off their helmet and a whole load of hair comes tumbling out and there's a girl underneath the helmet, and I go in to interview them. And that really should be their first understanding that this is a women's motorsport series, because the quality of the sport really should be the selling point, and it certainly was in year one. Lily Squires asks me, how would you suggest young women who wish to pursue careers in sports journalism get started in the field? Well, I give you a little bit that I started quite young. I knew what I wanted to do, but I stand by it in that do as much work experience, and work experience I think is different probably for most people at that age now than to when I was starting off, that you had to go in somewhere to do it. But now there's blogs and there's social media, and that's a whole different thing. But I would also say conduct yourself in social media, not necessarily as a crazed fan, that you're angry when somebody doesn't win a race or, your team doesn't win a match. You should really conduct yourself as a brand or as the person that you want to be when you get employed. And that would be how I would say. And also don't be shy, like contact everyone. When I was at university, I would go to the Edinburgh Science Festival because I knew that there was a Formula One engineer there talking. Then afterwards, I would ask to interview him, and then I would sell that story to the Scotland Sunday or the Sunday Times or someone. It might just be 150 words, but I used every opportunity to be able to get to speak to people that I wouldn't naturally be able to speak to. And actually, the last year and lockdowns are the perfect time for that, because everybody has so much more time. And I would guarantee that if you reached out to somebody, they will give you a little bit of time, and then how you choose to distribute it, that's up to you. But you know, it is hard work. I will say that it's hard work, but it's very, very rewarding when you get it right. We are running out of time, so I just want to ask one for all before we head off. An anonymous attendee says, and I think this is quite a really interesting one, because I know I've glanced through the attendees list and there are quite a few men here as well, which is just wonderful. And the anonymous attendee says, how do we take all men on the ally journey? Because I think it's important to say this isn't not about going up against men, is it? It's not like women versus men. We're not in the sort of playground here. It's actually inclusive. And I think this is a nice one to finish with. So Sabrina, I don't know if you could start this one.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's really important to recognise where there are gendered stereotypes and issues that are causing a problem, because they hold us back as a society, not just as women, not just as men, but it holds us back as a society. And it's incumbent on all of us to do our bit to do that. And it is important, I think, to develop allies. I would also say that not everyone is going to be an ally. Not everyone is going to come on that journey. And sometimes when I write posts about International Women's Day, I have to take a deep breath and wait for the whataboutery to start afterwards. And if I had a penny for every time I was asked when International Men's Day is, which actually only seems to happen on International Women's Day, ironically enough, it gets really frustrating, you know, and it just kind of highlights all of the problems that we have. But I think being able to articulate the impact of some of these things and articulate why it's important that we take people on the journey, why the journey is important in the first place, I think will help us on that.
Catherine, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I think we all agree on this panel that equality, diversity and inclusion in its greatest sense is incredibly important. And if people do not agree with that, we have to talk and we have to communicate with those people. We have to challenge those people as to why they don't agree that there should be equality across the whole of society. If people are, I think if there are specific sexist comments and stuff that I have received, I always tend to use a sense of humor and take the mickey out of someone for it, because I feel as though you can have a pretty strong verbal riposte if it is a joke rather than a harsh comment towards someone. But when men say, if a man says to me, how can we come on the journey? The fact that they've asked the question means they are. You know, we're not different. You know, we're all in it together. We all want, or, you know, most of us want a equal and inclusive society. And yes, and let's all crack on together.
Yvonne, do you want to just close it out?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there's always going to be those that are resistant to understanding, but those that are willing to come along on the journey, I think the key is to just have really open and transparent conversations. And particularly with those working in organizations, I think, you know, starting from the top if you can, because I think oftentimes these things change comes from the top, right? And so that's probably the best place to start, and just use the voice that you have really to bring about the change that you want to see.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. A couple of weeks ago, a very well-known racing driver actually put out on Twitter that he didn't like female rugby commentators. There shouldn't be female rugby commentators, essentially, and they should stick to commentating, like, you know, you don't get a man commentating on netball or something. And I looked at it for a long time and I was like, is it clickbait? Is somebody, you know, you don't know if someone's drinking or whatever. But then I decided I had a sort of duty to get involved. So I just wrote back and said, well, presumably you don't enjoy listening to every single male commentator. So why do you presume you would like every single female commentator? Because there'll be female commentators that I don't particularly enjoy listening to, and there'll be male commentators I don't particularly enjoy listening to. And also men have been commenting on netball for a lot of years now. And the response made no sense. It just said, keep up the great work, and a thumbs up emoji. So yeah, I kind of skirted over it because it wasn't exactly the sort of intellectual dialogue I was hoping to get back. But that is the situation in which we live. And I think it actually threw up quite a good point. I was like, no female likes every female, no male likes every male. And that is just the way of the world. But if we're all working together for greater inclusivity, whether it be ethnicity or gender or whatever it is, I think we can hopefully all make it a better place. And I think the fact that everybody has been here listening to this, we're all probably very much on the same page. So I thank you. I thank you, Sabrina, Yvonne, Catherine, and to everybody who has helped arrange this. And thank you very much to everybody. Well over 100 people have been here listening to us, which is very humbling. So yeah, before we go, I know I can you can all unmute, and we can go wild in the sort of shape of 2020 when everyone's constantly on mute, aren't they? Well, that's all we get told nowadays. You're on mute, and I think we can all just say thanks to everyone.
Thanks very much, Lee. As ever, you've been brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sabrina, to Yvonne, to Catherine, and hopefully we'll get to all do it again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.